Welcome everyone to this webinar this morning. I'm Greg Burke. I'm the Director of Place and Civic Engagement at Sheffield Hallam University, and I am the lead for the Civic University Network nationally. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started this morning. This session will be recorded and made available after the event. That process has already started, so we're already recording. Please do use the Q&A function to put in any questions, which we will be picking up as we go through the session. Please don't use the chat for your Q&A. We will be monitoring the chat. Please only use the chat for issues or for putting in comments, but not for your questions, because we may miss them if you put them in the... We will be monitoring the chat, but we may miss your questions if you put them in there. So please do put them in to the Q&A function. We hope today this event will provide universities with the opportunity to discuss the civic work that they are undertaking. It's always really interesting to hear what different universities are doing on this civic journey. As we've done these things before, we found really interesting insights from the local perspective, the different environments, the different challenges that people are operating under, and that real opportunity to learn from one another, so that as we continue along this journey, we can really benefit from that shared experience. We're delighted to have two universities sharing our stories with us today, the University of Derby and the University of Leicester. From the University of Derby, we have Rosie Marshall, Head of Corporate Communications, Dr. Rhiannon Jones, Associate Professor, Professor Keith Maclay, Provost, Learning and Teaching, Catriona Munn, Derby Cathedral and University of Derby, the Very Reverend Dr. Peter Robinson, Dean of Derby, and from Leicester, we have Paul Angrave, Head of Public Affairs, University of Leicester, Manuel Alonso, Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Loughborough University, and Sarah Thompson, Director of Engagement, De Montfort University. So I'm going to pass over to colleagues from Derby, who will take us through their first presentation. After the presentation, there will be a short time for questions before we move on to the next presentation, and then there will be a time at the end for broader questions. So I'll pass over to Derby colleagues.
Thank you very much, Greg, and it's a pleasure to be in this webinar and to present the Civic University Agreement journey which the University of Derby has been on with its partners over the past 12 to 18 months. Next slide, please. If I could have the next slide, please, that would be excellent. Thank you very much. So these are the individuals that are involved with this presentation and have already been introduced by Greg. So we will move swiftly on to the following slide. As an anchor institution within the city of Derby and the wider county of Derbyshire, the university has always felt keenly its role as a civic university, but that role is very much founded upon a philosophy and a belief in civic humanism, drawing upon the traditions of our philosophers of Cicero, Aristotle and Polybus that you can see on the screen, and the idea that as an anchor institution, as an institution dedicated to learning and teaching and to research and pushing boundaries of knowledge, we also have a responsibility to take that knowledge out into the civic realm and apply it and work with our communities, whether that be within the realm of culture, whether that be within the realm of industry, whether that be within the realm of health and well-being. And that was really the starting point for the University of Derby's process and journey towards articulating and signing a civic university agreement. Next slide, please. And what I have here is a very short video clip, which I will ask to be played, which really just gives a sense and flavour of the university's commitment to its civic community and to the public engagement with that community. If the video could be played, that would be helpful. Thank you.
across the country, rooms, classrooms, facilities, but I think it's the people that really make it.
This is Houston. It's a good picture of the horizon. We can't see many terrain features as yet. Apollo 8 Houston, we're beginning to pick up a few craters very dimly. The whole thing is pretty bright.
It's probably the first time that my son has seen the world in that sort of context. He doesn't understand yet, but he will one day.
You may be able to respond to that. We did this in a number of different ways. We held panel discussions and Q&As across our different locations where the university is based. We held face-to-face meetings and events, focus groups, and a number of different surveys and questionnaires. So we had some really fantastic insight that we could draw from, and a lot of the issues and challenges that people were speaking to, we already knew about and resonated with some of the things that we were working on. We also set up a civic and community committee so that there was more of a formal governance structure in place to support all this work. And the main recommendation really was that universities who wanted to develop agreements needed to do it in partnership with those in the local area and to focus their civic activity based on the needs of the local community. So you can see that there were lots of different challenges and priorities that came out for us on this slide. We obviously can't respond to all of them, but a lot of them and a lot of the work that we were already doing or thinking about aligned really nicely with that. Next slide, please. Sorry, are the slides still available? The slides aren't showing. Got a technical hitch. Well, I can. Okay. We're just onto the slides with all of the So those were the challenges and the priorities that were facing us. And then if we can just move on to the next slide with all the signatories on. Thank you. So we were delighted to secure the support of such a wide range of signatories from organisations across the city and county, all working and connecting with university, with our staff and students through live projects, placements, research and outreach. And we're now working with them as a group to help drive the agreement forward. Next slide, please. So this is an image, just a screenshot of our Civic Hub that we've created on the website. It's going to be going live imminently, but it's really designed to be the one-stop shop for everything that we do that's related to our civic activity. It's been developed as part of the comms and profile raising work that we're doing to showcase the impact. It's a place where we can share case studies and links to fantastic projects, and really where we can also bring our signatories into that. So it's a bit of a reciprocal website as well. We're expecting to link to them and they can link to us. On the screen, you can see an image from Over To You. This was a community project. It's been shortlisted for the Community Project of the Year by The Stage. And this was led by an organisation called Derby Can in association with Derby Theatre, which is owned by the university. This Civic Hub platform also is a way that we can showcase our teaching and learning and our research and innovation. So everything is embedded within our University of Derby approach to civic. And this includes the practice of excellent public engagement by our academics, our professional services staff and students. And this is recognised by the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement Awards of a Bronze Watermark in 2022 that we were really proud to receive, and we're obviously going to be working towards the next watermark, the silver, at some point. And it's important to highlight that as well as the role of educators, universities such as Derby have long worked to support social mobility and levelling up. That's an area that we're really strong in. innovation, research and economic growth, and enhancing the cultural vibrancy of our communities. And that's all themes that tied in within our Civic University Agreement. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I'll now welcome Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Rosie. So as a sector, I think we all recognise the profound economic and social challenges that are happening across the UK and indeed globally. And that has made the role of a university as a civic institution even more vital. So at the heart of our civic agreement, it has really been about placing our communities, our networks, right at the heart of everything that we're deciding to do. For us, it's about partnership. It's about how we can work effectively together to bring change, to drive forward new opportunities. And so some of the examples of how we're going about doing that, I'll share with you all on the next slide. But I just want to preface that by saying that could I just go back a slide, please? So I just want to preface that by saying that today is an opportunity for the university to share with colleagues in this network and talk about how our 5 goals that you could see on screen here are ultimately about how we are working extremely hard as an institution to create a sense of belonging, to ensure that we're a place for learning that seeps out into every corner of our neighbourhoods, to make sure that we're investing in culture as a driver for change so that we can truly make that difference and attend to these goals so that together we can create civic impact, create skills development opportunities, and drive forward knowledge creation. We know that we want to ensure the best possible experience for all when they come to Derby and Derbyshire. We know that we want to lead the way in social transformation, but that we want to be authentic in the civic regeneration potential for our region. As Keith pointed out, it's very much a journey that we're on. And like all good journeys, the destinations are sometimes around the corner and out of sight, but not out of reach. We know that our agreement will flex. It will be responsive to need. Our aims and objectives are clear, but we are willing to embrace the unknown, to adapt, to respond, and to co-create. Key to all of this is how we listen, how we understand the intelligence that comes from the communities around us. So as a university, we are not the driver of this. Rather, we instigate and support through co-production. So next slide, please. So that strong co-creative approach to all of our civic endeavours is true with how we work with students, staff, stakeholders, schools, and the public. And the images on screen show just some of the projects and ways in which we are working. They vary in scale, they vary in length of duration, but at the heart of all of them are 3 core principles. How do we create recognition for the work that we're doing? That we make sure that we give space for people to tell their story, and that we are constantly enhancing learning and teaching and recognising the abundance of talent and opportunities for new skills to be nurtured and developed at an individual and community level. Reflected, I think, in the fact that Derby has been accepted as a member of UNESCO's Global Network of Learning Cities in 2022. This was in recognition of the outstanding efforts made to lifelong learning, to make it a reality for everybody in the city. And we have a strong commitment to that as a university. We believe that education should be for all. We also have the community interest company Shed, a reconfigurable touring, art and public engagement space. It has 32 co-designed configurations that have all been driven forward through public engagement. It has delivered to events to over 4,000 members of the public and reaches over 22,000 people regularly online. We're also on the cusp of welcoming our first cohort of Saturday Art Club young people. With a focus on society and change, we are going to be enhancing opportunities to engage with art and cultural activities, to think about real world issues and to drive forward opportunities and uncover hidden talents in our young people. We've also been awarded by Arts Council a Creative People and Places project, which will focus on the Amber Valley in Derbyshire. And that will also allow us to really think about what creative and cultural offers could be made possible and how we can widen opportunities and access to creativity. All of these programmes are challenging our thinking. They're striving to make positive impact for people of a specific place and time, and open up new ways and new opportunities for civic learning. Next slide, please. We see ourselves as an integral part of our business community, which is a core part of the fabric of Derby and Derbyshire. We support innovation and we recognise the impact that positive change can have on individuals through community practice, creating a greater sense of belonging, supporting health, well-being, and the investment in local businesses as a cultural driver for change is something we're extremely proud to be involved in. The Civic Lab Research Group works across the institution. We have as many internal as external members of the group and have over 70 staff who engage and 10 core staff who drive the activities forward that occur on a monthly basis. We make sure that in everything we do, we are reinforcing our commitment through action to our local area. And now I would like to welcome our colleagues from Derby Cathedral, who are also one of the university signatories for our civic agreement. And I'm delighted to introduce the Very Reverend Dr. Peter Robinson, Dean of Derby. Peter, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Apologies for that. So first of all, say thank you, Rhiannon, for handing over to me, and to say how pleased I am and how pleased the Cathedral is to be very much part of this conversation this morning, and in particular how pleased we are to be a signatory of the Civic University Agreement. The University and the Cathedral in Derby are two key civic institutions, and we share in the life of the city together in many, many ways. And in fact, we have an historic link going back to the Victorian period, and I currently sit on the governing council as a nominee of the Bishop of Derby. So why is the Cathedral a signatory to the Civic University Agreement? What does it mean for us to be a signatory? Well, two things perhaps. First of all, it's about making a key contribution. Positive civic change, health and well-being, investment in culture, commitment to community learning are just some of the headlines for us as I glance across the Civic University Agreement. But perhaps more to the point is that the university and the cathedral share many common goals. It's about becoming more civic together. It's about being seen as having relevance and a role in the city. And above all, I believe it's about making together a good contribution to the common good. Someone described the cathedral the other day to me as part of the thought leadership in the city of Derby. And perhaps as we move into the future, the university and the cathedral together might offer leadership in those areas that really do need conversation and hard questions being asked as the city develops in all sorts of exciting ways. And we offer that leadership together with the university in the spirit of partnership. We work closely together in many areas already. We work through the Multi-Faith Centre at the university, bringing the faith communities of the city of Derby together, and a new and exciting partnership configuration. Rhiannon mentioned the SHED project, helping to hear the youth voice. That's something we're very committed to, and in fact we have hosted. We're thinking about how we might develop our contribution to public debate, asking those difficult questions about how the common good is achieved and making a contribution to the wider city in that way. But I'm now going to hand over to Katrina Munn, who's our Business Development Manager, who's going to talk to us about one project in the arts and culture world in particular. Thank you, Katrina.
Thanks, Peter. Can I have the next slide, please? So we saw the opportunity to develop our partnership with the Cathedral through our programming of Luke Jerram's Gaia last autumn. And as you can see from the images, this is a spectacular installation, 7 meters in diameter installation with showing detailed imagery of the Earth's surface from NASA. So Gaia at Derby Cathedral was a very important part of our growing and active arts and culture programme, which helps to attract new audiences into the cathedral, but also build relevance to wider communities. The university very kindly agreed to be a headline sponsor for the project, understanding that it would have benefits for them as well as for the cathedral. They saw that the project spoke to the Civic University goals, particularly number 5, which was all about culture as a driver for change. It met criteria such as creating a positive impact in the community. It really brought vibrancy to the city centre, but also gave a platform for discussing issues around the environment and well-being. It was our academic focus of the programme too, through staff and student involvement, and it also enhanced the university's profile through marketing and comms. So I programmed Gaia at the cathedral as part of Derby Fest Day, which is the city's annual arts festival, which increased its reach and audiences. So university branding appeared on the cathedral's marketing materials like the leaflet and posters. You can see the leaflet front on the screen there, but also additional reach through Fest Day leaflets and programming. So the project was a massive success. We saw 37,000 visitors come through the cathedral doors over the 3-week period, and 17% of those were when we were open in the evening. It was covered on online, print and broadcast media, including regional TV, and the university was mentioned in 67% of that coverage, which reached an estimated 1 million plus people. So it really did have presence in the city. It was a great platform for the cathedral, but also for the university as our close partners in delivering it. Could I have the next slide, please? So an important part of the partnership was the potential to build a very exciting and meaningful programme of supplementary events throughout the installation. And we worked with the university on a few of those. One of them was a music and wellbeing talk featuring research from Dr. Yoon Irons and Professor David Sheffield, which was fascinating discussion around the benefits of music to wellbeing, particularly with Parkinson's patients as a focus area. But the event also involved the university choir as well, so it was a wonderful evening. Keith hosted or facilitated an online discussion with the artist Luke Jerram, which was fantastic and also broadened audiences. And we had a Blue Marble Civic Lab discussion where the public and university colleagues were invited to discuss the significance of Gaia and the blue marble effect that astronauts described on first seeing the Earth from space. So it was a really wonderful, impactful programme of events. And certainly the support of the university was fundamental to the success of Gaia at Derby Cathedral. So on behalf of the cathedral, we're incredibly grateful for the financial support that the university offered, but also their added value, their expertise and time in kind, which was given in helping to deliver this project, which had a really impactful effect on the city, and it engaged and enthralled and mesmerised so many people in Derby, but also beyond. So that's what I wanted to say about this project. Over to Heath.
Thank you, Katrina. Hopefully, colleagues, that has given you a good flavour of the journey that the University of Derby has been on with respect to the Civic University Agreement. It's a journey grounded in the philosophical precepts of civic humanism. It's a journey founded on working with our local community and our civic partners and making real projects and initiatives across the different goals of the Civic University Agreement. And most importantly, it is a journey which continues. Next slide, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much to colleagues from Derby. I think it's been a really interesting insight into your journey, and it's particularly interesting to hear the perspective from other stakeholders who've obviously been actively involved in what you're doing. I think one of the things I love the way you said about embracing change, and I think that's really an interesting point that we might want to pick up a bit in the Q&A later, because I think that whole idea of actually, as universities, we're not always that good at embracing change, and particularly I think when we write documents like our Civic University agreements, it can be very easy to feel we've done that, we're now delivering it, and not necessarily recognising that the world around us is constantly changing and we need to adapt and reflect that change. So I think it'll be quite an interesting theme to pick up as we go into Q&A, but thank you very much. That's really insightful and great to have so many different perspectives around the table. We're now going to go straight into the next presentation from our colleagues to get the Leicester perspective, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So encourage people, please do put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to pick those up. So over to our colleagues from Leicestershire.
Well, hello, good morning everyone, and thanks to colleagues at Derby for taking us through that presentation. I think we've probably got a slightly different perspective in Leicester because we have 3 universities within the region who are working together on their civic agreements. I think a lot of our presentation today is talking about how we've built that community amongst the 3 universities and how we've built that partnership across multiple local authorities with multiple different political ideologies, which has been part of the challenge we've had, but also some of the opportunities that have come from the way that we've worked together in Leicester. So next slide, please. So we actually launched our universities partnership as we branded our Civic University Agreement on 28th of June 2022. And prior to that, we'd been working on developing what the Civic University Agreement would look like for about 18 months. Initially, it was a partnership between De Montfort University, which is based in the city centre of Leicester, for those people who don't know, because Clue is not in the name, and also the University of Leicester. And then after about, I think, 12 months of working together, Manuela, correct me if I'm wrong, Loughborough University were very keen to join, and we were absolutely delighted to have them on board. And I think having 3 such different universities with 3 very different approaches and academic profiles has been quite foundational in the way that we've approached how we've pulled together this agreement and the way that the universities have worked together, but also with the different local authorities. Speaking of which, we actually have 5 local authorities that cover the geographical area of the universities. So just a note on that, because I noticed from Derby's presentation that you have lots of wonderful, lovely signatories on your Civic University Agreement. And we had a big conversation about this in Leicester, about who we actually got to sign up to the agreement in the initial stages. And we took the approach that because we were working with across 3 universities, which I'm sure if colleagues on this call are from large institutions, working in one is complex enough, trying to work across 3 has been quite interesting at times. And also with the 5 different authorities who sort of govern the geographical area, we took the approach that in the initial phase of the setup of this partnership, that would be the entirety of the signatories. And then as we develop and move across within the 5 themes, which I'll come to talk about, we would start to add signatories across sort of like the third sector and our business communities, and some of those conversations have now started to happen already. But our initial 5 partner signatories to the agreement were Leicester City Council, which is an elected city mayor and a Labour-run council, Leicestershire County Council, which is a Conservative council and doesn't have an elected mayor. We have Rutland County Council, Oadby and Wigston Borough Council, and Charnwood Borough Council, again, all with very different elected representatives, slightly different priorities and slightly different agendas, which I'll talk about a bit in a moment. So next slide, please. So similar to, I would imagine, every other university developing a civic university agreement, we didn't just sit in a cupboard and write it. We went and looked at what the local needs are of the local area and what the strengths are of the 3 universities that are involved, and looked at kind of how we would then structure the themes within our partnership. It's really interesting. I think Greg just picked up on a point about embracing change throughout the duration of agreement, and colleagues I was working with in all 3 universities have worked in civic work for a long time and know that it often changes at quite a pace when a local need arises that you hadn't factored in when you wrote your strategy. COVID is a perfect example of that. We were all working in civic work, and then obviously COVID hit, and we all had to think very differently about how we were interacting and how we were responding to the needs of the local area in a nimble and flexible way, which again are not necessarily words that are often associated with universities and university structures. So we took the approach across the 3 universities that we'd have a theme group structure. So we identified the 3 themes, which again, I don't think would be surprising to anyone on the call. We're looking at education, we're looking at the economy, we're looking at health, well-being, and thanks to colleagues at Loughborough, we also added sport into that mix. We're looking at environmental sustainability and arts, culture and heritage as our kind of broad focused themes. And then the way we've structured this is to set up a theme group structure around each of those themes. So every theme has a lead from each university, actually 2 leads from each university, from both an academic and a professional services context. And then those theme groups meet regularly and discuss the projects and sort of grassroots level. We realised we had a lot of partnerships already in place, a lot of colleagues doing really good work across the region within those themes, and we didn't want to kind of cut across that. So we've enabled them and empowered them to be able to do that work through the structure that we've set up. So they meet regularly as theme groups, and then they feed back in to the wider governance around this project, which if you flip to the next slide, I can talk you through. So we've established a universities partnership steering group, and I suppose one of the reasons we really wanted to focus on what governance we've set up in this presentation today is maybe to have a conversation with colleagues about how we've used the governance to actually deliver what we're trying to do. We sort of place the governance front and centre, and it really does speak to Greg's point earlier about change, that we felt that actually if we regularly could get the right people in the room at a strategic level across the authorities and across the universities, regularly talking about what the issues are locally, it would develop that space for us to be able to respond to that local need and to be able to react quickly and say, who do we need in the conversation? What can we do? How can we react to this? How can we do something about this issue that's just arisen? So the top level governance is that we have a universities partnership steering group, which has leads from each of the local authority and the 3 universities, who all operate at a strategic level within their institutional authority. So they are decision makers. They had to be people who could make things happen once they had not just come to a meeting and everybody kind of go, isn't it terrible? But actually people who have agency in their own organisations to make decisions. We would then obviously, as a steering group, we're constantly identifying areas of focus and what external challenges are happening within the region and how we might respond to them. We're also hoping that we would develop that partnership steering group into a forum where people are able to bring forward ideas and have more of a kind of discussion, rather than simply an approval committee. And as I've sort of already touched on, it ensures that all the plans and the projects that are happening in those theme groups at that kind of grassroots level remain connected with those local strategic priorities, and we don't get a bit of scope creep or people running off and doing a project that actually we feel might have limited impact or it just isn't a priority at that present time. Next slide, please. And then underneath the steering group, we have a universities partnership board. Because we have 3 universities in this agreement, we did feel that actually we needed a forum between the 3 institutions who would have kind of governance over those different theme boards and what's happening within each of those institutions. It's much more of a kind of operational management group. It's supporting the development of the theme group. It's also ironing out those issues when they come up. There's some things that I think the 3 universities agreed, let's not air that in front of the local authorities, let's solve that ourselves and then have that kind of wider, more strategic conversation. But it also allows that feed up. So we've got the kind of top level strategic board, but we also wanted a space and a forum for those ideas from the theme groups to be formally fed in, so that we've got the kind of civic ideas and initiatives that are coming in and that come up to that board. And also there may be things, we identified 5 themes for the theme boards and for those projects that would sit in those theme boards, but we also agreed there may be things at a strategic level that we wanted to do outside of the theme group structure and do as a board or do in partnership with other organisations. So that universities partnership board is a space to identify what those wider, I hate to say the word corporate, but maybe those more corporate projects might be with the local authority. So that is how the structure works. Next slide, please. And I think I might be handing over. I'm going to hand over to my colleague at Loughborough University, Manuel, to talk about our long-term model.
Thanks, Sarah. So yes, just briefly talking about the way in which we're trying to plan activity, because a key component of what we need to do as a partnership is demonstrate that we can deliver some things and make some change. So that top circle of planning projects probably is better framed as a funnel, actually. So if you imagine, as Sarah's just been talking there, you imagine we might get suggestions for areas of activity or priorities of work we need to do coming from the theme groups. It might come in from our local authority partners. It might come in from the university entities more corporately, or from the community more locally. That's our kind of funnel in to consider what do we think are the important areas we need to plan some project work around. And as colleagues at Derby indicated, there are more areas for us to focus on than we could possibly do. So there's a kind of initial filtering to be done there. But we're quite clear that once we've kind of identified the project work that we need to do to address an issue, we'll be careful about how we plan it, we'll implement it, but at the point of implementing, we're going to make sure we're clear about how we capture the evidence as well of the impact of what we're doing, such that we can report back on that quite clearly, both to internally through the governance structures that Sarah's already alluded to, internally to our universities and our local authority partners, but also externally as well, to talk about what the partnership's delivered and perhaps encourage other members to join, and then evaluate what we've done. So consider what was successful, what wasn't successful, and how does that feed back into the way in which we plan future projects. That gives you kind of oversight of how we're viewing the sort of project life cycle of the work we're trying to deliver. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of emerging projects then, there are kind of 4 that we're looking at and that we're considering at sort of partnership level. So the first is around procurement. So all 3 universities, fairly geographically close to one another, quite big direct contributors to the local economy. In considering that economy theme that we have as part of the agreement, we identified that we wanted to do some work around joint procurement, and also aspects of social value in our procurement processes as well. So the 3 universities plus one of the councils has entered into partnership to secure something called a social value portal, and we're going to use that to drive specifically identifying social value activity as part of the tendering process. So asking particular things of contractors in terms of their feedback into the local economy, opportunity to employ local people, placement opportunities, but also kind of other equity and diversity considerations. The second project we're working on is around how we market Leicester, Leicestershire, Rutland as a kind of international entity. Now, clearly, we've all got interest in doing that as 3 institutions, but also our local authorities have got an interest in how we come together and market the locality internationally, because that's bringing benefit to the local economy as well. A third strand around graduate retention. So there's already some project work that has been going on for some time with colleagues at DMU and the University of Leicester about retaining students in Leicester City. We're looking to how we might expand that out to encompass Leicestershire and Rutland, and how we might retain more of our graduates in the area, what sort of skilled workforce is going to be required for the area, and do some proper longer term planning around that. And then lastly, a kind of topic that I think is probably live for all universities at the moment is around student mental health. and we're working with the local partnership trust about specific pathways and a specific partnership we might develop around student mental health. That gives you a kind of sense of some of the areas of activity that are going on in the partnership at the moment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about money because money's important, obviously. So in order to get the agreement up off the ground, I'm going to say this colleagues at DMU and Leicester that did this actually secured £100,000 of ESRC funding, which helped with the initial phase of getting this up off the ground. So it enabled consultations with schools and the local community to identify the themes that Sarah talked about earlier. It enabled us to pilot some training. So we trained up a bunch of students to be able to do sustainability audits in local businesses, for example. It paid for us to be able to do that, and also to create a design directory for the local area as well. There's quite a strong design tradition in Leicester and Leicestershire, actually. So this enabled us to build a directory to bring all of those things together. So that ESRC funding was really important to help get the agreement up and off the ground, to give some resource to be able to use to start things off. Next slide, please. And now we're kind of considering, all right, what other opportunities are there for us to be able to use the agreement to drive funding, securing project funding to be able to deliver work that's of benefit. So when we had our first steering group meeting with all our local authorities, we asked them to identify their priorities. Pretty much all of them said funding is really challenging at the moment. So being able to identify how the partnership might be able to bring in some external funding is really important for us to be able to not just deliver what we want to do, but also sell the benefits of this to our other partners and local authorities in particular. So that ESRC local accelerator funding expired in June. So we're now looking at two funding routes, which I guess other colleagues will be aware of as well. So one, which will be closing around March, April time, I think, is the impact acceleration accounts. So clearly, the work that we're doing in the partnership shows how the three universities can engage with local authorities and the local community to deliver impact in the locality. And so we think this gives us a good platform on which to bid for this type of funding. And we've just put in a bid for some local policy innovation partnership funding. Again, those are all about identifying what the important social economic factors are in the locality and working with partners to address those. So clearly the agreement gives us a really good platform. So we're considering how we use the partnership that we've got to demonstrate when these funding calls come out that we've got a ready-made model into which people can drop funding, which will enable us to have a positive impact on the locality. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Paul just to finish up for us. Paul.
Super, thanks Manuel. Thanks everyone. I'm going to talk about some of the current things that we're thinking about in our partnership. So if we could have the next slide, please. Sarah and Manuel have spoken brilliantly about how we've set up the partnership, and what we've realised is that we've got a lot of governance structures, we've got lots of partnership working happening, and actually lots of enthusiasm from our partners to work with us. And with all that, with the fact that our ESRC funding had expired, we thought it's worthwhile the university's making a commitment to an actual dedicated post to the partnership. So that's gone out to advert. It closed on Monday. There's been huge interest in the role, which suggests that there's really interest in Civic University work. It will work across the three universities. It's jointly funded. It will support all of the fantastic people that are in our theme group. So we're conscious that people who are involved in civic work are doing it on top of their existing roles usually. So they're doing it voluntarily, doing fantastic work, but we need to support them in that. So this post will do that. It will help us to coordinate between the different theme groups across the project. And importantly, it will evidence what we're doing, write reports and show that, hopefully show that what we're doing has an impact. Next slide, please. So in terms of responding to regional challenges, Sarah mentioned that these change very, very quickly. So we started out the agreement in June. At that point, there was no talk of a cost of living crisis, and now it dominates sort of every perspective of our life. So we asked the theme group what their priorities were, and they came back to us, of course, with cost of living, but three things ultimately that result from that as well. So the first was around community tensions, cost of living issues are causing tensions within the community, and how the universities might be able to help address some of those. So we've got from Leicester people in our criminology department who have come up with models for how to engage the community and how to participate get participation from across all ranges of the community. So we'll be hopefully doing something like that with the local authorities, helping them to embed that within their policy making. Skills gaps are a major issue in our region, but also for our local authorities. They gave us a huge list of roles that basically couldn't be recruited to. It seems obvious that as universities with graduates, we try and address that through pathway programs. That's something we'll be looking at with them. And then, of course, meeting net zero targets, which is not a new priority, but I think the cost of living makes it even more difficult for us to meet those targets. And again, across our research base in the 3 universities, we've got fantastic people who can help our region to overcome some of those issues. And Manuel mentioned the point around students and training them up to go into businesses and help small and micro businesses to consider these issues as well. So next slide, please. In terms of common strategy, we launched the partnership in June, and we're really keen that we continue to talk to our community about what the partnership's doing, the impact it's having. So this is something that we're considering recently. We want to ensure there's awareness of what we're doing. That builds good engagement, because this is really all about engagement. Importantly, we want to focus on the impact for the community, not the project itself, but what good it's delivering for Leicester and for Leicester and Leicestershire and for our local people. We decided that actually the partnership is broader than just what comes out of the Civic agreement itself. It's really about how the 3 universities and civic organisations work together to create a better region. So we will be talking about things publicly that might have an interest for our region and nationally. So to give an example, international students, it's something we're thinking, the government are thinking about reducing the numbers of international students. Our region has a real take on that. It's a really diverse region, and we're really proud of the international students that come to our region. So that might be something that we develop a project about. So I think that brings me to the end of the presentation, but if you could go next slide. No, one more slide, actually. Next slide, please. So KPIs are really important, because we want to ensure that what we're doing is measured and delivers an impact. We had Hatch Regeneris, who are economic consultants, do a report on the university's economic impact. But as well as economic impact, we're looking at how we can measure as an area, really, the impact that the universities have. Graduate retention rate is picked up by our local authorities as being really important, because if you retain skilled graduates in the region, it boosts the economy, boosts skills. So they're the types of measures we're looking at. I have to say, we've not agreed them yet. When we spoke to our steering group, the local authorities, as part of that steering group, surprised us a bit, in the sense that they said, look, what we want you to do is just crack on and go and deliver some activity. Let's not overthink about KPIs at this stage. So it's next on our agenda. We will secure some KPIs. Some will be at a strategic level. The theme groups have got KPIs for the projects they're working on, and we'll measure our progress against clearly defined KPIs. Next slide, please, which I think is the last one. So yeah, that brings our presentation to an end. Hopefully you've learned a bit about the way that we've approached setting up the partnership, some of the challenges we've had, some of the opportunities that there are, but we'd be delighted to take your questions about any aspect of what we've discussed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, and to colleagues. As always, it's been really encouraging that people have been so open and willing to share their experience, both positive and negative. And what's really helpful, I think, in these sessions is where people are willing to talk about the challenges, the things that perhaps haven't gone quite so well, or are still things to resolve. Because I think as we talk about those things, it helps us to have the sort of shared learning across the network, so we can all work through the things and share one another's experience. But I think it's a very positive aspect of all of these presentations that we've had through the network. We've had a number of questions coming in, and I think probably the one that falls quite neatly following on from what Paul was just saying, a number of questions around impact. And I think this is something that all universities are really struggling with in this space. And it was quite interesting what Paul was saying about the local authorities saying, don't focus quite so much on impact, but focus on activity. So I suppose what we see across the network in talking to universities is we probably do quite a lot of activity, but actually our demonstration of impact is not so clear. and we haven't really yet developed as a sector that sort of framework of how do we measure impact and what might be the sensible things to have as key performance indicators, or whatever term we use. So can I start with Leicestershire colleagues first, and then we'll go to Derby with that question around, you know, what have you faced so far in terms of the challenges about developing measures, and what's your next steps? And I suppose what would you find helpful from us working collaboratively in developing that space, really? So Paul, I don't know whether you want to kick off and then pass over to colleagues if appropriate.
Yeah, very happy to. I mean, it's a really fascinating discussion with KPIs, because almost the ones that are important to the region, I mentioned graduate retention, we have to accept that some of those are outside of the direct control of this partnership. So there's kind of two approaches we could take. We could go to the micro level and measure things around, say, sustainability audits and how many sustainability audits that we do. And that will help us to ensure that we're delivering on specific projects. Some of the bigger ones that are regional based, graduate retention, economic performance, some of the issues we'd really like to tackle through the university's partnership, because they're not directly in our control, we'd have to think really carefully about if those situations change and the measures weren't positive, does that mean that the university's partnership hasn't been positive or hasn't had impact? So it's a complicated picture, really. There are measures out there. Universities measure a lot of data, as do local authorities and regions. I suppose where we are at the moment is just trying to select a few KPIs that will give a general picture of health in the region, and perhaps not focus on targets, which might be outside of our control, alongside some other specific KPIs to do with the efficiency and sort of operation of the partnership itself. I don't know if Sarah or Manuel want to come in.
Sarah.
I think Paul, you covered it really well, and I think I was watching the questions about impact come in, thinking it's probably one of the biggest conversations we've had as a group, in terms of, I suppose, one, just wanting to demonstrate that impact, but two, kind of justifying the work in some way as well. So I think that it feels like there's a responsibility to do that. I think what would help is a national framework that we can all kind of, you know, mark ourselves against in some way. I know we've talked about things that are in TEF or REF or KEF that were like, how does this fit with the civic agenda, and how can we use bits of that to try and measure some of the work that we're doing? But it feels like an add-on or an afterthought, or it goes in the text rather than being a measure that you can actually all accurately measure. I suppose the challenge for a national framework, when I start thinking about it in detail, is regional priorities will be different. So graduate retention may be an issue for us. It might not be for other universities. That might not be a challenge. It might not be something they're particularly struggling with or particularly pressed by their local area to improve on. And also then I think there'll be other institutions that are maybe based where their outreach needs to be bigger, because, you know, we're 3 institutions in a very small city. I think the population of Leicester is about 320,000 people. It's a tiny city. And the region is bigger, but I know there are obviously institutions based where they've actually got that reach, is reaching out to areas where there isn't another institution. So I think how we actually measure that impact in a national way is a huge challenge. I don't really know what the answer is, but I do definitely think having that sense of maybe the method through which we measure, and then making sure that that is relevant for your locality is important. And I think the other point I'd just make is there is conflict in this, and I think in the civic work, that being there's some uncomfortable truths, and there's some kind of like an institution's agenda around even something like graduate retention might not always fit with what the institution needs, what the local area needs, what other metrics we're currently trying to kind of feed into as institutions. So I think we have to be really careful when setting kind of the impact of a civic university agreement. We do so aware that actually some of those impacts might not sit comfortably with other things the university is trying to measure, and how we actually have that conversation and hold that nuance, I suppose, because that can be a challenge, I suppose, in this space.
Thanks, Sarah. Anyone else from Leicestershire want to come in before I go to Manuel?
Yeah, just really briefly, I won't add too much because Paul and Sarah set out the kind of questions we're grappling with. 2 other things I'd observe. I think that there are tensions between the local authorities as well. They don't all have the same priorities, and they serve quite different areas. So we need to negotiate that as a kind of partnership. And the second thing is the audience that you're choosing to foreground certain KPIs or impact measures to. So Paul and I went and met with a bunch of business leaders yesterday, I suppose. what they're interested in is different to what the kind of the members of the partnership might be interested in, which will be different to what members of the local community will be interested in as well. So setting the KPIs, you need to have a level of subtlety about which audience you're going to be presenting which KPIs or which impacts to, in order to make it meaningful for them.
Thanks, Manu. Derby colleagues, anyone want to comment on this topic?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what's been shared by colleagues already. I think just to add to that, there is for us a sense of really having that time, care and due diligence to be active listeners, so that we're understanding what our partners, what local authority, what schools, what key stakeholders and our signatories are saying. So yes, everybody does have different priorities at different times, but ultimately there is a shared vision and a shared understanding. And I think that's something that's really special about Derby and Derbyshire, is that we very much have a collaborative way of working, and understand that in those nuances. And for us, I think that also links to the first anonymous question that was saying, how do you define the civic? For us, that's sort of embedded within that naturally as well, that we are saying, what is it for us? When we say we're a civic university, what does that actually mean? And if we get that right, if we really understand what that is, then that will drive forward what we want to achieve through that. So at the moment, we're having those conversations. We've got a lot of live projects and programs that are growing, that are helping us through activity to ask those questions, to be brave together with our signatories, test things out. And there isn't a fear of failure, because in failure we learn. And I think that across the partnership, we understand that. We understand that we, as an institution for learning, you know, we want to learn. We are not saying this is how it is, here are our 5 goals. The whole thing has been generated through a series of co-created, co-produced activities. And so everything we do is foregrounded in that. And it's just almost becoming assumed that that is our approach. And I think that gives us then power when we start to think about the interplays of language, the nuances of definitions of the civic. What it will mean to a student will be very different to what it means to one of our stakeholders, to one of our signatories, to a school that we go and do work with. But collectively, we're saying, what are the issues that are happening around us in the world? What's your lived experience like? How are you a good citizen? What does that mean to you as a starting point to have those conversations? And then from that, what is the economic or the cultural impact that we can have? How do we support students into work and retain those students in Derby and Derbyshire? So for us, it's a very entangled and slightly messy process. But with that come out these moments of real insight for us about, that's what being a civic university means to us. That's what we need to act on. And that is where we're going to get impact. And by impact for us, we're saying, you know, what's the area for development here for our people, for the place? And from that, what new knowledge do we get that will aid policymakers in their thinking, that will change from having closed shops to having incubation spaces start to be generated, to student work being more visible in the city and county, to getting more funders to look at our region and to look at our place and see it as somewhere really exciting that they want to be a partner and to invest in. And we see that with the Creative People and Places project that we've got now. We see that with the new partnerships and the new bids that we're starting to develop with people we haven't worked with before, because everybody has an understanding that we're in a really critical and unique moment, you know, with climate crisis. It is a climate crisis, and an economic one, that we need to work together. And I think, as I said at the start of my first slide, that we recognise that our role as civic institutions has never been so important as it is now. And I think, as problematic as it is to think about how we measure our impact, that cannot override the value and the importance of being a civic university in the first place.
Oh, that's really helpful. I really like your idea of failure and learning from failure, because I think that's one of the real opportunities in the civic space. Partly, I think, because we're not sort of judged externally, and this is, I think, goes back a little bit to the danger of measurement, because in a way at the moment, it's not part of our league tables. We don't get judged on it in the way that we do of other things. I think there is a real appetite amongst us as universities to take risks in this space and actually try things out and accept they might not work or they might work, and actually we learn from that and move, so I think that idea of failure and learning from failure is a really important part of, because we don't necessarily know what we can do and what we can't do and where does civic really work. I suppose that leads us into another question though, which is, we around this table are probably the sort of enthusiasts within our organisations of, we're involved in civic, we're obviously quite passionate about it. The question I think is around actually, how do we sustain that sort of energy and appetite for civic in our institutions? And I suppose particularly when, when financial situations come along, things are tough. Is this the thing that is very easy for universities, executive boards to say, well, it was quite nice that we did that civic stuff, but actually it's not really our priority. We're not being measured on it. Actually, let's just stop doing it. So quite interested on views. Keith, you've got your hand up on that one. So you've perhaps had some personal experience of this already.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Yeah, I put my hand up quite quickly because I think I'd sort of had an instinctive reaction to the question that we posed it, and I think I'd probably like to turn it the other way around.
Yeah,
say,
of course.
What we found is that there is a huge enthusiasm within the university to engage with the civic and the civic realm, but it's that people don't quite know how to do so. They don't quite know how that can be facilitated in an effective way, and that's really been the mainstay of our job as part of the journey to the Civic University Agreement, is to have a series of explanations and explanatory sessions to demonstrate to colleagues how they can readily engage with the civic and the partners out in the city of Derby or the wider county of Derbyshire. And so it's not been so much focusing upon people sort of giving up or facing the challenge or going to one side. It's actually revealing to them how they can easily channel their enthusiasm for the civic in a purposeful way. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Keith. Any other colleagues want to come back on that question?
I would just make a point about leadership actually in your institution. So I think the three, Manuel, Paul and myself, have definitely found, I think one of the fundamental changes was we all got a new Vice-Chancellor. And actually it was that newness of 3 new VCs coming into an area to kind of build a partnership. So there were no established relationships. It was kind of like that real kind of focus on the civic, I think was probably, I don't know if the other two would agree, but I think certainly helped in my institution, and I think helped build that partnership. So I think that kind of, it does need leadership from the top. I think I could certainly see in an institution where you haven't got a VC that's really pushing the civic agenda, you're going to come a cropper very quickly. Yeah, I
think that's a really important point, that leadership comes through a lot in, where universities have been very successful in the civic space. It is usually the case that there is, senior leadership. If not always the case, there is senior leadership bought into it. Whereas actually, if you're just doing stuff at a more operational level, you can only get so far before it becomes quite difficult. I think that probably links into one of the other questions that's come through, which is around sort of goals. So I think a number of you have talked about, how you've developed, collaboratively, whether it's with other universities or with other local partners, what you're doing in your civic space. And I think the question is sort of getting at, you can, and a couple of you have sort of alluded to this already, that actually, the more people you talk to, the more complicated it becomes and the more difficult it is to define what your goals are as opposed to what might be the place goals, because actually the place may have 15 things that it's trying to do, but actually how do you work out where you can align, I suppose, your institutional goals with the place goals, so that you're actually working in the most sort of sensible way of having impact. So quite interested in people's, I suppose, a bit of your experience of trying to align goals at institutional level with the goals of the place, but also just how do you perhaps do a bit of filtering where, as universities, we could get involved in everything, and that is probably not the right thing to do. So how do we decide as institutions, where do we put our energy and where do we get the most impact? So anyone want to kick off on that one? Paul, you're off mute. No.
No, I mean, I'm happy to talk to that. I was going to come in actually and echo what Keith had said on the previous question, which is around the enthusiasm that we found at Leicester for the Civic agreement. You tend to find you have lots of people who are living in the local area, so they want to see the local area prosper. So in terms of goals, yes, there are differences, but I would make the argument actually that civic work is not an add-on, and it is quite fundamental to the way that universities operate in their environment. There's a relationship between research and your local environment. So for example, at Leicester, we've got a really diverse population, and that comes through in some of the health research that we do. So I don't think you can untangle the two. I think as well, when staff and the organisation see universities doing good in the community, it really boosts morale. So we've found that doing this work has not only enhanced our reputation, which locally, which is helpful. I mean, you can't exist outside of your place. Just on practical things like universities have campuses, they need to extend them, they have planning permission. I mean, it's really important to be engaged with the community in that sense, but also boosting morale, showing that the university is delivering good in the region. It just really does help with the university's goals and helps to deliver on strategy. So that's where I'd take it, really.
Thanks, Paul. Manuel, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Paul said there, and I think it's very unlikely that if you're having that conversation with your local partners, that you won't identify at least 2 or 3 things where there is really good coincidence between the university priorities. As Paul said, none of us exist in a kind of vacuum away from the local environment we're sat in. I mean, my observation would be, Sarah talked about the steering group and the local authority partners in there. What's quite interesting about that is it also gets the local authorities to consider the priorities they've got and how well aligned or not they are with each other, even though they're geographically quite linked. And it sort of forces the conversation to say, let's agree the things where actually we do think we've got some common priorities, even amongst the local authorities, which we can then consider as a partnership. So it's not just getting the universities to consider how ours align, but also getting the local authorities to consider how theirs align, and then bringing those together, which is, I think that's been quite an interesting dimension of the conversation.
Thanks, man. Rosie.
At Derby, when we were developing the Civic University Agreement, we used our strategic framework, which has been in place since 2018, as a basis for that. And a lot of the work and the ambition within that around making a positive impact, moulding the next generation of game changers, opening doors for opportunities, all feed into the agreement that we came up with. And we'd already recognised, as I think I mentioned in the presentation, that some of the challenges that we built into that aligned with what the communities were telling us. We've also got a series of academic themes around topics such as zero carbon, public services, creative and cultural industry. So again, that feeds in and aligns with the goals that we've got set out in the Civic University Agreement. So as it happened, it all came together really quite nicely from a very strategic sort of starting point. So that's how we did it at Derby. Obviously it will evolve, but it all talks to each other, it all ties in together. And when we started to float the idea to our signatories of getting involved, that also resonated with what their sort of goals were and values of their organisations as well.
Thanks very much. Another question around, a couple of you mentioned the sort of links between academics and professional services. And I think that's quite an interesting area around how you bridge that gap between the different bits of the university and bringing everyone around the sort of civic agenda. So I think I'm just interested a bit in how have you gone about bringing people together who don't necessarily structurally sit together, but actually bringing them around a common goal. Sarah, do you want to kick off on that one?
I can do, yeah. So I talked a little bit about this, and it was really fundamental to what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We did not want this. We could see the pitfalls of it going purely academic or it going purely professional service. So actually bringing those communities together was a real focus for us. We've done it through the theme groups. So we were really prescriptive with the institutions that we wanted, people who were working in the area. So take health and wellbeing, for example. We wanted academics who were researching health and wellbeing and things within that area. And we also wanted the professional service colleagues who are used to delivering services. So we've got a variety of colleagues, some who are doing health and wellbeing type activity with a student focus, and some who are actually part of the HR department at the university. So we've got that real broad, everyone came to it with an interest in that specific theme, and then building space for actually just what their contribution from their professional practice is to the overall Civic University agreement, so that they feel they've got a bit of ownership over it and their contribution is as valid. And actually, I mean, I wouldn't say it's perfect. We've definitely had some themes where we've thought, gosh, this isn't, it hasn't quite worked as we thought it would. But where we have got that combination right, I definitely say that actually the strength found between bringing the professional services and the academic colleagues together has been really good. And we've tried to approach it, Manuel, Paul and myself have tried to approach it with as much transparency as possible. And we've been really honest. I think it was a colleague from Derby said, when something's not working in a theme, we haven't just gone, let's pretend it's all okay. We've gone, let's address this, have an honest conversation, have a conversation with those colleagues to say, we don't think this is quite achieving what we hoped it would, and try and deal with it head on.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. Keith.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to echo Sarah's reflections there, I mean, I think for Derby, it was two things. It was organisational and it was people. So the organisational bit, in a sense, was perhaps a bit more straightforward. Our Civic and Community Committee, which is one of our key strategic committees in the university, is a combined committee of academics and professional services colleagues alongside external colleagues, and Rosie is co-chair of that alongside myself. Rosie coming from the professional services side of the house. I'm an academic within the university. So in that sense, in terms of governance and placing Civic at the heart organisationally of the university, we can do that fairly straightforwardly and have done so. The other element, though, is the people, and it's the leadership, and it's ensuring that the university community and all institutional approach is understood and led from the very top. And colleagues, I think, mentioned leadership by vice chancellors or members of the executive. So I sit on the university executive and can provide that, and our vice chancellor is also committed to this endeavour being an all-institutional effort, and that has been made clear. And then the third element is to link to our work with the externals. It's not exclusively academics that might provide that project link or theme link with our external partners. It can be a wide range of people from across the institution. So it's kind of organisational, and it's people and leadership, I think, is important to ensure an all-institutional approach. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. Paul.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I agree with what Sarah and Keith have said. I just wanted to reflect on how important culture is as well. So for me, the interesting thing that's come through this Civic University agreement that we've put together is the cultural change in having academic colleagues, yes, working with professional service colleagues, but also working with external partners who are often not academics, you see. So yeah, for me, there's a permission that comes from having a Civic University agreement, from the university saying it's really important to do this together. You then find that the culture follows, and people feel as though that they can go and have those conversations with DNU, with Loughborough, and with externals. And also by creating the framework to make that happen, it makes it easier for people to participate in that way. So as a result of our agreement, we shared some project ideas. So to take one, our director of procurement was really interested in social value. And through having this framework in place, we've been able to procure that portal that will help then all of the organisations involved direct our supply chains to enhance social value. So that could be things like providing placements, providing better working conditions, providing better terms. But what he'd tried to get that moving before and wasn't able to, but having this agreement has made it happen, because we've got the formal structures in place. And I think culturally, everyone's eyes are more open and accepting of partnership. So I'm really excited about the potential of where this could take us, because I think there are many areas in which local universities are not competing actually, but working together. Take yourself from the perspective of someone who's in the public or who's a partner. They're in an area that's roughly one region, Leicester and Leicestershire. Why should they want to engage with 3 different universities when they can do it through one mechanism? So it could be quite a powerful thing.
I think it'd be very interesting to share after this event the links to the procurement gateway that you talking about, because I think that's something that a lot of universities are working on in different ways. I think it'd be really interesting to find out a bit more about that, Paul. Thank you. Another question that's come in is around sort of how we define place, really. And I think people have commented on, in both presentations, you sort of talked about your county as opposed to just your city. And I think people were just interested in, had you started with the idea that your place was your city and expanded to your county, or had you always seen your county as your place? So I think from both sides, Derby and Leicestershire, people are quite interested in how you sort of defined your place, really. Because I think it's something some universities find very easy and some find a lot more difficult. So Rosie.
I think from our perspective at Derby, we are the only university in the city and county, so it was quite a clear decision that that's where our place should be, focused on geographically. So that's what we did. It was as simple as that. We're
that's
Derby, Derbyshire.
Yeah. And Leicestershire colleagues, obviously you're working with the other universities, so was that partly around your definition of place?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. So we started out, as Sarah mentioned, it was DMU and Leicester who started out. So we're both based in the city primarily, but then the University of Leicester has its halls of residence in the county. So the county was kind of always in our remit. We had really interesting discussions about which partners to involve. Bringing Loughborough in naturally brings the county council in across the piece. Then the other 2 local authorities we engaged were the borough councils, in which we're directly based. So for Loughborough, that was Charnwood Borough Council, and for Leicester, it's Oadby and Wigston Borough Council. We didn't sort of set out with a set definition of place, but you kind of have to confront it as you go along, because your partners often have a place-based sort of remit. And yeah, I think we take a fairly flexible approach. Leicester, Leicestershire, not every project needs to be across the whole region. Some could be city focused, some could be county focused. Some might even have a more micro focus than that. But fundamentally, our staff and our students live and work in Leicester and Leicestershire. So that's where we wanted to focus our agreement, along with Rutland as well, because they sort of have a close relationship to Leicester. Thanks,
Paul. Peter.
Yes, thank you. And from the perspective of someone who sits outside the university as an institution, I think it's really important we don't take place as a given. Place isn't a given. Place is always being redefined. So I'm thinking at the moment about the debate in the East Midlands about the East Midlands economic area. That will profoundly change our sense of place. And the university doesn't just receive what place is. It's a participant in creating place. So, for example, I know that our university has made a significant contribution to the debate about the East Midlands area that involves re-looking at the sense of place and the boundaries and so on. So I think place is dynamic, and therefore we mustn't make an assumption that it's given, and we must recognise our own role in creating place. And we must also recognise, I think, that as places change, boundaries change and outlooks change, goals will change as well. So we're very much not in a static environment. And I think that's got to be part of this discussion, is about how universities can help shape place and bring place into, I'm going to say a better place, but to create better places that are more advantageous to local communities.
Peter, I think that's a really good final comment, actually, around recognising that as universities we are creators of place and not just responders of place. And it may sound very obvious as you say it, but actually I'm not sure it is how we've always behaved. I think quite often as universities previously to re-engaging with the civic space, we perhaps have quite often been passive and responding to things that have been happening and working out how do we respond. Whereas I think what's happening across the country now is a lot of universities are really picking up that mantle of being placemakers rather than just responders. So I think that's a really interesting point to end. It just remains really for me to say thank you to all participants, particularly to our panel today and the excellent presentations. Really lots of things to think about. As always, it's great just to hear. I love it when people like Paul say, I'm really excited about Civic. It's great to hear. And although not all of you have used that word, what comes across is excitement and energy. And it's great to see that as a whole sort of movement of people who are really interested in seeing what universities can do in this space. I was just going to mention a few of the things we've talked about today are big themes that will be picked up by the National Accelerator that is just kicked off, being led by Sheffield Hallam, which is a Research England project to really develop a sort of what works centre, building on a lot of the stuff that you've been sharing around things that we can, build on, that people are already finding works, people will be able to benefit from the product. So do catch up with the newsletter from us and you'll get more and more information on what's coming through on that. And I think one of the things that will be particularly important in that is developing the sort of measurement side, really. And I really liked what Sarah was saying about potentially having a tool that is very flexible, but perhaps we can all use the same tool, but we might want to pull out different indicators because those indicators are the indicators that really matter for the civicness that we're doing, rather than that it's one set of civic indicators that everyone uses. There might be things which may be things like graduate retention, but perhaps, we all have the same data sets feeding in, we all are able to access the same sort of scorecard, but we might use different elements that are tailored. So that's something we really want to take forward as part of the NCIA. So we're not all basically reinventing the wheel, all trying to do the same thing. But so very happy that we will, try and involve others around this virtual table in that work as it goes forward. And obviously a number of you here today, I've got a particular interest in that. So just remains to say thank you very much and hope you all have a really good weekend, and we'll all speak again soon. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.